The text came through while I was still at my sister's grave. "I changed all the locks while you were gone." The exclamation point felt like a slap. Below it, a video loaded slowly on my phone, the cemetery's weak signal making it buffer in painful chunks. When it finally played, I watched my daughter-in-law Amber and 3 women I'd never seen before throwing my late husband's military uniforms into garbage bags. They were laughing. One of them held up Vernon's Purple Heart medal, dangling it like a toy before tossing it aside. Another woman was ripping photos out of frames, pictures of Terrell as a baby, pictures of Vernon in his dress blues, pictures of our wedding day 46 years ago. Before we continue, please tell us where you're watching from so we know how far our stories reach, and subscribe to the channel to help us grow. I sat in my car in that cemetery parking lot for 20 minutes, just staring at my phone. My sister Claudette had been buried 2 hours ago. I'd driven 6 hours to Atlanta for her funeral, stayed 1 night with my cousin, and driven 6 hours back to Richmond. I was exhausted, grieving, and now this. The text had come from Amber's number, but there was something about those women in the video that made my stomach turn. They moved through my house like professionals, like they'd done this before. They weren't just trashing my things, they were searching for something. Vernon had been dead for 8 months. Heart attack, sudden and final, right there in his workshop where he spent most of his retirement tinkering with old radios and organizing his military papers. Terrell had brought Amber home 6 months ago, claiming they'd gotten married in Vegas during a weekend trip. My son had seemed different after that trip, quieter, slower to respond when you talked to him. I'd chalked it up to grief over losing his father. Now I wondered if it was something else entirely. I started my car and drove toward home, my hands shaking on the wheel. The house Vernon and I had bought in 1983 sat on 3 acres at the end of a quiet street, surrounded by oak trees and the vegetable garden I still maintained. As I turned onto our road, I could see furniture scattered across the front lawn. My grandmother's rocking chair. The dining table where we'd hosted every Thanksgiving for 30 years. Vernon's favorite reading lamp, the one with the green glass shade he'd bought at an estate sale. I pulled into the driveway and sat there, engine running. The front door stood open. I could see shadows moving inside. Amber appeared in the doorway, phone in her hand, smirking. She was 28 years old, blonde, with the kind of sharp features that looked pretty until you noticed the coldness in her eyes. She'd told us she worked in real estate, that she'd met Terrell at a conference. I'd tried to welcome her, invited her to church, taught her my grandmother's recipe for sweet potato pie. She'd smiled through it all, called me Mama Joyce, hugged me at just the right moments. Now she stood in my doorway like she owned it. I got out of the car slowly, my knees protesting. 71 years old, and I was about to confront a woman half my age who'd just changed the locks on my own house. "Amber," I called out, keeping my voice steady. "What's going on here?" She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Mama Joyce, I'm sorry, but this isn't your house anymore. I've been living here for over 30 days. That makes me a legal tenant. Squatter's rights." She held up a piece of paper. "I've got documentation and everything. You want back in, you'll have to go through eviction proceedings. That takes months in Virginia." The 3 women from the video came out onto the porch behind her. They looked like they could have been anybody. Suburban moms, maybe. Office workers. The kind of people you'd pass in a grocery store and never think twice about. But there was something coordinated about them, something practiced in the way they positioned themselves. "Where's Terrell?" I asked. My son hadn't answered his phone in 3 days. I'd assumed he was working late, pulling extra shifts at the logistics company where he managed the warehouse. Amber's smile widened. "Terrell's fine. He's just taking some time to himself. He agrees this is for the best. Your house, your savings, everything. You're old, Joyce. You don't need all this space. We're going to sell it, split the money, start fresh." Something Vernon used to say came back to me then. He'd been in military intelligence before he retired, worked on things he could never talk about, brought home habits that seemed paranoid until they weren't. Joyce, he told me about a year before he died. If something ever feels wrong, if you ever feel like someone's playing you, trust your gut. And remember, I've got insurance. Check the workshop. I hadn't known what he meant then. Now, standing in my own driveway while strangers threw my life onto the lawn, I remembered. I'll be staying at my neighbor's house tonight, I said carefully. Henrietta's expecting me. We'll sort this out in the morning. Amber shrugged. Whatever. Just don't come back without the police. And even then, good luck. I know my rights. I backed out of the driveway, watching her in my rearview mirror. She was already on her phone, probably texting someone. Those 3 women had disappeared back into the house. I drove 2 blocks to Henrietta Cole's place, a neat brick rancher where she'd lived for 40 years, raised 4 kids, buried 2 husbands, and still found time to run the church's food pantry. Henri opened the door before I could knock. She must have seen me drive up. Joyce? Baby, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I told her everything while she made tea. Henri listened the way she always did, nodding in the right places, her face showing every emotion from shock to rage to determination. When I finished, she set down her cup with a decisive click. First thing tomorrow, we're going to see Raymond Clark. He handled my second husband's estate, and he doesn't play. Then we're going to the police. She paused. But Joyce, something you said is bothering me. Those women in the video. You said they looked professional. They did, I confirmed. Like they'd done this before. Henri pulled out her laptop, her fingers moving across the keyboard with surprising speed for a 75-year-old woman. There's been talk on the neighborhood forum. 3 other military widows in Richmond, all in the past year. Houses broken into, valuables stolen, and in each case, there was some young woman who'd attached herself to the family first. She turned the screen toward me. Look at this. The forum post showed photos from a police bulletin. 3 women, all different, but there was something similar about them. The same calculated smile, the same age range. And in one of the photos, I recognized one of the women who'd been in my house today. My hands started shaking again. Henri, Vernon's workshop. He told me to check his workshop if anything ever felt wrong. Can you get in there? It's separate from the house. He had it built with its own entrance, its own lock. He was particular about his privacy. Vernon's workshop sat 50 feet behind the main house, a converted garage where he'd spent countless hours. Even I rarely went in there. He'd always said it was his space, his way of processing 30 years of military service. We're going tonight, Henri said firmly. Right now. You've got the key? I did. Vernon's keys were still on my keychain. I hadn't been able to bring myself to remove them. 20 minutes later, we were parked down the street from my house, lights off, waiting. The living room windows glowed, and I could see shadows moving inside. Amber and her friends were still there, probably sorting through everything Vernon and I had accumulated over 46 years of marriage. The workshop sat dark and separate, hidden partly by trees. Now, Henri whispered. We moved quickly for 2 elderly women, crossing through my neighbor's yard and approaching the workshop from the back. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, everything was exactly as Vernon had left it. His workbench covered with old radios in various states of repair. His filing cabinets labeled in his precise handwriting. His desk, where his reading glasses still sat on top of a thick folder. I turned on the small desk lamp, keeping the light low. The folder was labeled Insurance in Vernon's handwriting. Inside, I found documents that made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing unusual activity in the months before his death. Photos of Amber with different men, time-stamped and annotated. A marriage certificate between Amber Sullivan and someone named Gregory Westbrook, dated 2 years ago. Not Terrell. She was already married. But it was the next document that made everything click into place. A printout from what looked like a classified military database. Vernon's security clearance had been reactivated 6 months before he died. He'd been consulting, doing something he couldn't tell me about. and he'd discovered something. "Joyce," Henri breathed, looking at another folder. "These are surveillance logs. Vernon was watching them. Watching her." The logs showed Vernon had installed cameras throughout the house and workshop. High-end military-grade equipment, the kind that backed up to secure servers. He'd documented Amber's arrival, her behavior, meetings she'd had with various people when she thought no one was home. And in his notes, written in his careful handwriting, was a single phrase that made my heart stop. "Foreign intelligence operation, active threat, contact Agent Hayes, FBI." There was a phone number. Henri and I looked at each other. "We need to see those cameras," she said. Vernon's computer sat on the desk, password protected, but he'd taught me the password years ago, made me memorize it. His mother's maiden name combined with my birthday. The computer hummed to life, and suddenly I was looking at multiple camera feeds from my house. I could see everything. Amber and those women weren't just stealing. They were photographing documents from Vernon's filing cabinets, the ones I'd thought contained boring military paperwork. They had professional equipment, special cameras for capturing documents quickly. One feed showed the basement. My breath caught in my throat. There was someone down there, lying on a cot against the far wall. Even through the grainy camera feed, I could see it was Terrell. My son was in my basement, and he wasn't moving right. "Oh my God," Henri whispered. "Joyce, is that—" "Terrell," I confirmed, my voice breaking. "That's my baby." I grabbed Vernon's phone list and found Agent Carmichael Hayes's number. My hands were shaking so badly, Henri had to dial for me. It rang 3 times before a man's voice answered. "This is Hayes." "Agent Hayes, my name is Joyce Dupree. My husband was Colonel Vernon Dupree. He's dead now, but he left me a note to call you if anything went wrong." The words tumbled out. "There are people in my house. They have my son. They're photographing classified documents. My husband left surveillance footage. I think you need to see this." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "Mrs. Dupree, I'm going to need you to listen very carefully. Where are you right now?" "In my husband's workshop, behind the house." "They don't know I'm here." "Do they know about the cameras?" "No. Vernon set them up himself. They're backing up to a military server." More typing, faster now. "Mrs. Dupree, I'm seeing the feeds now. Your husband gave us access when he reactivated his clearance. We've been monitoring this operation for 4 months. I'm dispatching units to your location now. Do not, I repeat, do not approach the house. Stay where you are." "My son is in the basement. He's not moving right." "We know, Mrs. Dupree. We've been watching him too. He's alive, but he's been sedated. We're going to get him out. I need you to stay on the line with me and describe exactly what you saw in your husband's files." So I did. I told him about the marriage certificate, about the bank statements, about the surveillance logs. And Agent Hayes told me things that made my world shift on its axis. Mrs. Dupree, the woman calling herself Amber Sullivan, is actually Amber Westbrook. She's part of an organized theft ring that targets military families. But it's bigger than theft. They're after classified documents, selling them to foreign operatives. Your husband stumbled onto their operation while consulting on a security review. He installed those cameras to gather evidence. We've been building a case for months." "How many families?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. 12 that we know of. Your husband's surveillance is the first time we've caught the entire operation on camera. The documents they're photographing tonight, they're bait. Your husband prepared false classified papers before he died, left them exactly where they'd look. Every person who touches those documents tonight is going to be charged with espionage." Through Vernon's computer screen, I watched FBI vehicles pull up silently on the street. Agents in tactical gear moved into position around my house. Amber and her associates had no idea what was coming. They were still in my living room, still sorting through Vernon's papers, still photographing fake classified documents that would bury them all. "Mrs. Dupree," Agent Hayes said, "your husband was one of the smartest men I ever worked with. He knew something was wrong 6 months before he died. Every camera, every document, Every note he left you, it was all building to this moment. He protected you, your son, and 12 other families. The arrests we're about to make tonight will shut down the largest military intelligence theft ring we've seen in 20 years. I watched on the screen as the FBI breached my front door. Amber's face went from confident to terrified in seconds. They found Terrell in the basement, carried him out on a stretcher. Through Vernon's cameras, I saw everything my husband had set in motion, every piece of his plan falling into place exactly as he'd designed it. But as Agent Hayes kept talking, explaining the scope of the operation, the number of foreign agents involved, the classified information that had been compromised, I realized something that made my grief over losing Vernon shift into something else, something sharper. "Agent Hayes," I interrupted. "What else did my husband leave me? In his files? What else is there?" There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. "Mrs. Dupree, I think you should come to the FBI field office tomorrow. There are some things you need to see. Things your husband discovered about Amber's network that go deeper than we initially thought. Much deeper." I looked at Henri. Her face reflected what I was feeling. This wasn't over. Whatever Vernon had uncovered, whatever he'd left for me to find, we'd only scratched the surface. As FBI agents led Amber and her associates out of my house in handcuffs, as paramedics loaded my sedated son into an ambulance, I felt something harden in my chest. Vernon had started this. Now I was going to finish it. The FBI field office in downtown Richmond looked like any other government building from the outside, all concrete and tinted windows. Inside was different. Agent Carmichael Hayes met us in the lobby at 8 in the morning, exactly 12 hours after the raid on my house. He was a tall black man in his mid-40s, with close-cropped hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. "Mrs. Dupree, thank you for coming." He shook my hand, then Henri's. "Mrs. Cole, I appreciate you being here as support. What we're about to discuss is going to be difficult." He led us through security and into a conference room where another agent was setting up a laptop. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, maps with pins marking locations across Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina. I recognized my house in some of the photos. Recognized Amber. But there were so many other faces. So many other locations. "How's my son?" I asked before Agent Hayes could start his presentation. "Terrell is at VCU Medical Center. Dr. Imani Foster is overseeing his care. He's been systematically drugged for approximately 5 months with a combination of benzodiazepines and sedatives. His cognitive function is impaired, but Dr. Foster believes he'll make a full recovery with time and treatment. You can see him this afternoon." 5 months. My baby had been drugged for 5 months, kept compliant and confused while that woman dismantled our lives. I felt Henri's hand on my arm, steadying me. "Mrs. Dupree, what I'm about to show you goes beyond what we discussed last night." Agent Hayes pulled up a file on the laptop, and the screen filled with a flowchart. "Your husband discovered that Amber Westbrook's operation wasn't just about theft or selling classified documents. It was recruitment." "Recruitment?" Henri asked. "The 12 families they targeted weren't random. Every single one involved a recently widowed military spouse with adult children, specifically sons, between the ages of 25 and 40. In every case, Amber or one of her associates approached the son, drugged him, staged a fake relationship or marriage, and then used him to access the family home and the deceased veteran's papers." Agent Hayes clicked to another screen. "But here's what your husband uncovered that we didn't know. The documents they were stealing weren't just being sold. They were being used to identify active military personnel with access to current classified information." The next image showed a network diagram with Amber's photo at the center, connected to dozens of other people. Amber's real husband, Gregory Westbrook, runs a private security firm that contracts with the Department of Defense. They have legitimate access to military bases, to personnel records, to security protocols. The intelligence Amber's ring was gathering from deceased veterans' files was being cross-referenced with current personnel to identify targets for a much larger operation. I stared at the screen, trying to process what he was saying. You're telling me this goes beyond stealing from dead soldiers and their families? Yes, ma'am. We believe this network has compromised active security protocols at 3 military installations. Your husband's surveillance caught Amber photographing documents that contained outdated security codes, but they didn't know the codes were outdated. When they tried to use them, it triggered alerts. That's how we knew the operation was active. Your husband basically set a trap. Henri leaned forward. How many people are involved in this network? Agent Hayes pulled up another screen, 57 photographs. These are the people we arrested last night in coordinated raids across 4 states. But Mrs. Dupree, there's a problem. He clicked to a final image. A photograph of a man in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit. This is Gregory Westbrook, Amber's real husband, the man running the entire operation. We didn't get him. What do you mean you didn't get him? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He wasn't at any of the locations we raided. We have warrants, we have evidence, but we can't find him. And Mrs. Dupree, based on your husband's final notes, we think Gregory knows about the surveillance. We think he's known for weeks, possibly since before your husband died. The implication hung in the air between us. You think he killed Vernon? Your husband's death was ruled natural causes, heart attack. But given what we now know about the sedatives they were using on the sons, given the timing, given how thoroughly this operation was planned, Agent Hayes met my eyes. We're having your husband's body exhumed for a full toxicology screen. I sat back in my chair, the room spinning slightly. Vernon hadn't just died. He'd been murdered. And I'd spent 8 months grieving a natural death while his killer walked free. Where do we think Gregory is? Henri asked, her voice steady when mine wouldn't be. We don't know. But Mrs. Dupree, this is why you need protection. If Gregory realizes you have access to your husband's full surveillance system, if he knows what evidence you can provide, you become a target. I'm not hiding, I said immediately. Vernon didn't hide. He built a case. He gathered evidence. He protected people. I'm going to finish what he started. Agent Hayes looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I expected you'd say that, which is why I want you to meet someone. He made a call, and 10 minutes later, a woman in her early 60s entered the conference room. She had deep brown skin, her hair in a silver-streaked natural style, and her eyes held the same determined grief I was feeling. Mrs. Dupree, this is Yvonne Price. Her husband, Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Price, died 14 months ago. The woman who targeted her son was part of Amber's network. Yvonne sat down across from me, and when she spoke, her voice was tired but angry. They got $47,000 from our family account before my son realized what was happening. They stole Gerald's medals, his service records, photographs from our 40 years together. But the worst part? They had my son so drugged up, so confused, that when I tried to tell him what was happening, he didn't believe me. He thought I was the problem. Thought I was being paranoid and controlling. It took him 3 months after they left to finally understand what they'd done to him. How is your son now? I asked. Better. Angry. Ashamed. He blames himself, which breaks my heart because none of this was his fault. She pulled out a folder. But Mrs. Dupree, I've been working with Agent Hayes for 8 months, helping to identify other victims, building the case. When we raided those locations last night, we recovered items from 23 different families, not 1223. This operation has been running for at least 3 years. Agent Hayes pulled up more images. These are the families we know about. Some of them don't even realize they were targeted yet. The sons were drugged and released, the families were robbed, but it looked like standard theft. We need to contact all of them, warn them, gather more evidence. And Mrs. Dupree, with your husband's surveillance system, you have the most complete record of how this operation works. What do you need from me? I asked. Everything. Every file your husband left, every camera feed, every note, and we need you to testify when we catch Gregory Westbrook. Agent Hayes paused. But Mrs. Dupree, I have to be honest with you. Gregory is smart, well-connected, and he's had weeks to prepare. This isn't going to be quick or easy. I thought about Vernon, dying in his workshop while investigating the woman who was poisoning our son. I thought about Terrell, lying sedated in a hospital bed. I thought about Yvonne Price and the 22 other families who'd been violated by this network. Tell me what to do. The rest of the morning was spent copying files, giving statements, reviewing footage. Henri stayed with me through all of it, her presence a steady anchor. Around noon, Agent Hayes drove us to VCU Medical Center to see Terrell. My son looked smaller in that hospital bed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. At 34 years old, Terrell had always been strong, capable, the kind of man who helped neighbors move furniture and coached Little League on weekends. Now he looked fragile, his eyes unfocused, his movements slow. Dr. Imani Foster met us outside his room first. She was a tall woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Mrs. Dupree, your son is going to be okay, but his recovery will take time. The combination of drugs they used affects memory formation and cognitive processing. He's confused about what happened, about the timeline, about Amber. Some of those memories may never come back clearly. Can I talk to him? Yes, but keep it simple. Don't push too hard. Let him process things at his own pace. I walked into Terrell's room with Henri behind me. When my son saw me, his face crumpled. Mama, what happened? They're telling me things, but nothing makes sense. Amber, we were married, weren't we? But they said we weren't. They said she... His voice trailed off, confusion and distress clear in his expression. I sat on the edge of his bed and took his hand. Baby, I know you're confused. That's okay. That's normal. The important thing is you're safe now. You're going to get better. And when you're ready, we'll explain everything. Did I do something wrong? Tears were running down his face now. Did I let her hurt you? The FBI agent said something about our house, about Dad's things. Mama, I'm so sorry. I can't remember. I can't remember what I did. You didn't do anything wrong, I said firmly, squeezing his hand. You were drugged, baby, for months. None of this was your fault. You were a victim, just like me, just like your daddy. You understand? This wasn't you. We stayed for 2 hours, just sitting with him, letting him ask questions when he could formulate them, reassuring him when the confusion became too much. By the time we left, Terrell had fallen asleep, his hand still holding mine. Dr. Foster promised to call me with updates twice a day. Henri drove us to Reverend Geneva Washington's office at Third Baptist Church. I'd called ahead, asked for an emergency meeting with the church leadership. By the time we arrived, the pastor's office was filled with people. Reverend Washington, the deacons, the Mother's Board president, and about 20 other church members who'd heard something was wrong and shown up to help. Reverend Washington was a woman in her late 50s who preached with the kind of fire that made you believe anything was possible. She took one look at my face and gathered me into a hug. Sister Joyce, tell us what you need. So I told them. Everything. The theft, the fake marriage, Terrell's condition, the FBI investigation, the network of families who'd been targeted. As I spoke, faces around the room went from shocked to angry to determined. When I finished, Sister Yvonne Price, who'd come with us from the FBI office, spoke up. This is bigger than just Joyce's family or mine. This is about veterans, about military families, about people who served our country being victimized when they're most vulnerable. We need to organize, spread awareness, help the other families who were targeted. And we need to make sure Gregory Westbrook doesn't hurt anyone else, Reverend Washington added. The FBI is handling the legal side, but the church community can do things they can't. We can reach out to other churches, other military family support groups. We can create a network that protects people. Over the next hour, we formed a plan. The church would set up a support group for military families. We'd work with the FBI to identify and contact other victims. We'd create awareness about the scam, warn people about the warning signs. Sister Yvonne and I would co-lead the effort, with Reverend Washington providing organizational support. As people started volunteering, offering time and resources and skills, I felt something shift inside me. Vernon had fought this battle alone, gathering evidence in secret because he didn't want to worry me. But I didn't have to fight alone. I had my church family. I had Henri. I had Sister Yvonne and 22 other families who deserved justice. We spent the rest of the afternoon making phone calls, setting up meetings, creating a database of resources for victims. By 6 p.m, we'd contacted 8 of the other families. 4 of them hadn't even known they'd been targeted. The grief and rage in their voices when we explained what had happened was familiar. It sounded like my own. Agent Hayes called at 7. "Mrs. Dupree, we got a hit on one of Gregory's known associates, woman named Sheila Torres. She's in custody and she's willing to talk in exchange for a reduced sentence. Can you come back to the field office?" Henri and I drove back downtown in rush hour traffic. The FBI office was busy now, agents moving with purpose through hallways. Agent Hayes led us to an interview room where a woman in her 30s sat handcuffed to a table. She looked tired and scared. "Sheila, this is Mrs. Joyce Dupree. Her husband was Colonel Vernon Dupree." Sheila's eyes widened. "Oh, God, the Colonel. I told Gregory we shouldn't have touched that family. I told him the Colonel was too smart, too careful, but he said the take would be worth it, said the Colonel's files were gold mines." "What do you mean?" I asked, sitting down across from her. The Colonel had been consulting on a big project, something about new security protocols for overseas bases. Gregory wanted those protocols, worth millions to the right buyer. But the Colonel figured out what we were doing. He started leaving fake documents around, baiting us. And he installed those cameras. Gregory was furious when he realized we'd been recorded. "Where is Gregory now?" Agent Hayes asked. Sheila hesitated, then spoke quietly. "I don't know exactly, but I know he has a backup plan." He always has a backup plan. There's a safe house in North Carolina, near Fort Liberty. And there's someone else, someone higher up who's been protecting the operation. Gregory called him the Colonel, but he wasn't military. Private sector. Security contracting. Gregory said this person had connections that would keep him safe no matter what happened. Agent Hayes and I exchanged glances. A protector. Someone with enough power to shield Gregory from consequences. That's why he'd been able to run this operation for 3 years without getting caught. "Did you ever meet this person?" Agent Hayes asked. "Once, at a restaurant in D.C. about a year ago. Older white guy, expensive suit, acted like he owned the place. Gregory was nervous around him, which was weird because Gregory isn't nervous around anybody. They talked about expanding the operation, going after bigger targets, active duty personnel instead of just widows." My stomach turned. They'd been planning to escalate, to target people Vernon's age, people still serving. If Vernon hadn't caught them, if his cameras hadn't recorded everything, how many more families would have been destroyed? "Sheila, I need names, locations, anything you can remember about this protector," Agent Hayes said. "This is your chance to help make this right." For the next 2 hours, Sheila talked. She gave us names of other associates, locations of stash houses where stolen documents were kept, details about money laundering operations. She described meetings, phone calls, the hierarchy of the network. And slowly, piece by piece, we started to understand just how massive this operation really was. By the time Henri and I left the FBI office, it was after 10 at night. I was exhausted, running on adrenaline and grief and rage. Agent Hayes walked us to Henri's car. "Mrs. Dupree, we're going to raid that North Carolina safe house tomorrow morning. Would you like to be there when we bring Gregory in?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I want to look him in the eye. I want him to know that Vernon won, that even dead, my husband was smarter than him." Agent Hayes nodded. "We'll pick you up at 5 a.m. And Mrs. Dupree, your husband would be proud of what you're doing. finishing his work, helping other families, building something good out of this tragedy. That takes courage. Henri drove me home, but we didn't go to my house. The FBI had released it as a crime scene, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. Instead, we went to her place, where she made tea and we sat in comfortable silence, processing everything that had happened. Around midnight, my phone rang. Agent Hayes, his voice tight with urgency. Mrs. Dupree, we have a problem. The North Carolina safe house was empty. Someone tipped Gregory off. He's gone, and we think he's heading back to Virginia. We're putting protection on you and your son immediately. How did he know? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The protector Sheila mentioned, someone with access to law enforcement communications, someone who's been feeding Gregory information all along. Agent Hayes paused. Mrs. Dupree, until we identify this person, you're not safe. Gregory knows you have the surveillance footage. He knows you're working with us, and he's desperate. I looked out Henri's window into the dark street. Somewhere out there, the man who'd killed my husband, who'd tortured my son, who'd destroyed 23 families was planning his next move. And he had someone powerful protecting him. What do we do? I asked. We're moving you to a safe location tomorrow. You, your son, when he's stable enough, Mrs. Cole if she'll come. We'll continue the investigation from there. And Mrs. Dupree, we're going to catch him. I promise you that. But as I hung up the phone and saw Henri's worried face, as I thought about Vernon's empty place beside me and Terrell's confused tears, I wasn't sure promises were enough. Gregory Westbrook had 3 years of practice staying ahead of the law. He had money, connections, and a protector we couldn't identify. What we had was Vernon's surveillance, Sheila's testimony, and 23 angry families who wanted justice. It would have to be enough. The next morning, as FBI agents loaded us into unmarked cars to drive to the safe location, I watched Richmond disappear in the rearview mirror and wondered if I'd ever feel safe again. Gregory was out there somewhere, watching and waiting. The bigger threat we'd uncovered, the mysterious protector with power and connections, remained hidden in the shadows. Vernon had started this fight knowing it might cost him everything. It had. Now I was in that same fight, and I had to see it through to the end, no matter what it cost me. Because 23 families deserved justice. Because my son deserved to heal without fear. Because Vernon's sacrifice had to mean something. The safe house was in rural Virginia, a farmhouse surrounded by fields and watched over by armed agents. As we settled in, as Sister Yvonne arrived with files and Reverend Washington called with updates from the church network, I realized something important. We weren't just fighting Gregory Westbrook anymore. We were building something. A community of survivors, a network of protection, a system that would keep other families safe. Vernon had given us the evidence. Now we had to use it to create lasting change. And somewhere out there, Gregory Westbrook was making plans of his own. The question was, which of us would make our move first? The safe house alarm went off at 3 a.m, 6 days after we'd arrived. I jerked awake to flashing lights and Agent Hayes bursting through my bedroom door, gun drawn. Get to the basement, now. Someone breached the perimeter. Henri was already up, helping me into my robe as we rushed downstairs. Sister Yvonne met us in the hallway, her face tight with fear. In the basement safe room, 3 other agents stood guard while we listened to footsteps and shouted commands overhead. The breach alarm blared for 12 minutes before it finally went silent. Agent Hayes came down 20 minutes later, his expression grim. False alarm. Deer triggered the motion sensors. But Mrs. Dupree, this is the 3rd false alarm this week. Gregory is playing psychological warfare, keeping us on edge, making us second-guess everything. How much longer can we stay here? I asked. Terrell had been moved to the safe house 2 days ago, still recovering but stable enough to leave the hospital. He was upstairs sleeping, or had been before the alarm. Through the ceiling I could hear him pacing, confused and agitated. As long as it takes, Agent Hayes said, but I could hear the frustration in his voice. We'd been chasing leads for 6 days, and Gregory stayed one step ahead every time. The protector, whoever they were, was feeding him information faster than we could act on it. I couldn't sleep after that. At dawn, I sat in the farmhouse kitchen with Henri, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over empty fields. My phone rang. Raymond Clark, the attorney Henri had recommended. "Mrs. Dupree, I have news about your husband's exhumation. The toxicology screen came back. Vernon was poisoned. Slow-acting cardiac toxin, administered over several weeks. The medical examiner ruled his death a homicide." I'd known it was coming, but hearing it said out loud still felt like a punch. "When can I bury him again?" "The medical examiner will release his remains within 48 hours. But Joyce, there's more. The DA is filing murder charges against Gregory Westbrook. With the poisoning evidence plus everything else, we're building a capital case. If we catch him, he's facing the death penalty." "When we catch him," I corrected. "Not if, when." That afternoon, Reverend Washington called with better news. The church network had contacted all 23 families. 18 of them were willing to testify. We had statements, evidence, witnesses. The community support group had grown to over 200 people, including veterans organizations, military family advocates, and survivors of financial exploitation. "Joyce, we're planning a press conference," Reverend Washington said. "We want to go public with this story, put pressure on the authorities to find Gregory, warn other families about this scam. The FBI says it's safe to proceed. Will you speak?" I thought about Vernon, working alone in his workshop, gathering evidence he'd never live to see used. "Yes, I'll speak. For Vernon, for Terrell, for all of us." The press conference was scheduled for 3 days later at Third Baptist Church. Agent Hayes wasn't happy about it, worried it would make me more of a target, but he couldn't stop me. On the morning of the conference, I stood in front of 30 reporters, television cameras, and a church packed with 200 supporters. "My name is Joyce Dupree," I began, my voice steady. "My husband, Colonel Vernon Dupree, served this country for 30 years. He survived combat zones, terrorist threats, and classified missions I'll never know about. But he couldn't survive coming home. He was murdered by a criminal network that targets military families when they're most vulnerable, when they're grieving, when they're alone." I told Vernon's story. I told Terrell's story. I introduced Sister Yvonne, who told her story. One by one, 6 other family members stood up and shared how they'd been victimized. The reporters scribbled frantically. The cameras captured every word. By the time we finished, social media was exploding with shares and outrage. That night, Gregory made his first mistake. A reporter from Channel 8 News received an anonymous email claiming the FBI investigation was a fraud, that Vernon had been involved in illegal document sales himself, that I was creating a victim narrative to cover up my family's crimes. The email came from an encrypted account, but the FBI's cyber team traced it to a server in Northern Virginia, just outside D.C. "He's close," Agent Hayes said, showing me the trace results. "Closer than we thought. And he's desperate enough to start making accusations. That means he's running out of options. Or his protector told him to discredit us," I suggested. Agent Hayes nodded slowly. "We've been analyzing everyone with access to our investigation. High-level people. And Mrs. Dupree, we have a theory, but we need to set a trap to confirm it." The trap was simple. Agent Hayes leaked false information through 3 different channels, each with slightly different details about our location and plans. We waited to see which version Gregory acted on. It took 36 hours. On a Tuesday afternoon, while I was in the safe house kitchen helping Henri prepare dinner, Agent Hayes burst in with a laptop. "We got him. And we got his protector." He showed me an intercepted phone call. Gregory's voice, talking to someone about hitting the wrong safe house, frustrated that the intel had been bad. And then the other voice, cold and professional, telling Gregory to back off, that the operation was over, that he needed to disappear before he brought everyone down. "Do you recognize that second voice?" Agent Hayes asked. I listened again, and something about it nagged at me. Something familiar. "Play it once more." The third time through, it clicked. I'd heard that voice before, months ago, at Vernon's funeral. A man who'd introduced himself as a colleague from Vernon's consulting work, who'd offered condolences and asked if Vernon had left any work materials at home. "Floyd Bennett," I said suddenly. "The bank manager. He came to Vernon's funeral. He asked about files." Agent Hayes's eyes widened. "Your bank manager?" "He manages the military credit union where Vernon and I have our accounts. He has access to financial records for hundreds of military families. He'd know who was widowed, who had money, who might be vulnerable." The pieces fell together. "He's been feeding Gregory targets, using his position to identify victims." Within 2 hours, FBI agents raided Floyd Bennett's home and office. They found files on 83 military families, including detailed financial records, notes about vulnerabilities, and communications with Gregory going back 4 years. Floyd had been the architect of the entire operation, using his position of trust to weaponize people's grief. "We arrested him at his office," Agent Hayes reported, "and when he realized we had him, he gave up Gregory's location, a rental property in Arlington, less than 15 miles from the Pentagon. Gregory's been hiding in plain sight the whole time." The raid happened at dawn the next day. I watched from an FBI surveillance van parked 3 blocks away, seeing through helmet cameras as agents breached the rental house. Gregory was in the basement, surrounded by computers and documents, trying to erase evidence. They tackled him before he could finish. When they brought him out in handcuffs, I got out of the van. Agent Hayes tried to stop me, but I walked past him. I wanted Gregory to see me, to know who'd beaten him. Gregory Westbrook looked different from his photos. Older, tired, desperate. When he saw me, his face went pale. "You're supposed to be dead," he said. "My husband is dead," I replied, my voice cold. "You killed him. But he left me everything I needed to destroy you. Every camera, every file, every piece of evidence. Vernon was smarter than you. Even dying, he was smarter than you." "You don't understand what you've done," Gregory spat. "The people I work with, they don't forgive this kind of interference. You've made yourself a target." "No," I said. "You made 23 families targets. You made my son a victim. You killed a man who served his country with honor. And now you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison, knowing that you were beaten by an old woman and a dead man's ghost." They loaded him into a police transport. Agent Hayes put a hand on my shoulder. "How do you feel?" "Empty," I admitted. "I thought I'd feel victorious. But Vernon's still dead. Terrell's still traumatized. 23 families are still broken. Catching Gregory doesn't fix any of that." "No," Agent Hayes agreed. "But it stops him from breaking more families. And it's the beginning of justice, not the end." The trial took 9 months to reach court. During that time, Terrell slowly recovered. His memory came back in pieces, fragments of his drugging that made him angry and ashamed. We worked with Dr. Imani Foster, who specialized in trauma recovery. Terrell moved in with me, sleeping in his old childhood bedroom, slowly rebuilding his life. The community organization we'd started grew. Sister Yvonne and I became advocates, speaking at military bases and veterans organizations about financial exploitation and family safety. We helped create legislation requiring additional oversight for people accessing veterans' records. The church support group now met weekly, helping families navigate the aftermath of fraud, theft, and betrayal. Vernon's funeral, the second one, was attended by 400 people. Colonel Vernon Dupree was buried with full military honors. A 21-gun salute echoed across the cemetery as they folded the flag and handed it to me. This time, I knew the full measure of what my husband had sacrificed. He'd died fighting to protect people he'd never met. That was the kind of man he'd always been. The trial began on a cold Monday in February, 11 months after that text message had changed everything. The federal courthouse in Richmond was packed. All 23 families were there, filling the gallery. Gregory Westbrook and Floyd Bennett sat at separate defense tables, their attorneys working overtime to distance their clients from each other. The prosecution called me first. I walked to the witness stand in my church clothes, my best navy dress, and Vernon's wedding ring on a chain around my neck. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Angela Winters, guided me through my testimony. Mrs. Dupree, can you describe the first time you became aware something was wrong with your family? I was at my sister's funeral when I got a text from my daughter-in-law, except she wasn't really my daughter-in-law. The text said she'd changed the locks on my house. There was a video of her and 3 other women destroying my husband's things. I thought it was just theft at first. I didn't know my son was being held prisoner in my own basement. I didn't know my husband had been murdered. I didn't know about the 22 other families who'd been victimized. And what did you do? I went to my husband's workshop. Vernon had left me instructions, told me to look there if anything felt wrong. He'd installed surveillance cameras throughout our property, military-grade equipment that backed up to secure servers. He'd documented everything: Amber's arrival, her activities, the theft ring's operations. My husband knew he was in danger, and he prepared evidence that would catch them even after he was gone. I testified for 4 hours that first day, describing the surveillance footage, the FBI raid, the discovery of Terrell's condition, the network of families who'd been targeted. The defense attorneys tried to rattle me, suggested Vernon had been paranoid, implied I was exaggerating. But I had Vernon's files, the video evidence, the medical records. Facts didn't care about their theories. Sister Yvonne testified the next day, then 3 other family members. Each story was similar: a recent death, a young woman who attached herself to their son, money and documents that disappeared, sons who couldn't remember what had happened. The pattern was undeniable. On the 3rd day, they brought Terrell to testify. My son looked smaller on that witness stand, vulnerable in his suit and tie, but his voice was steady as he described what he remembered of his drugging, the confusion and fear, waking up in a hospital not knowing how he got there. The defendant took 6 months of my life, Terrell said, looking directly at Gregory. She made me forget who I was. She turned me into someone who couldn't protect my own mother. But she couldn't make me forget forever. I remember enough to know what she did was evil. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure other people don't go through what I went through. The prosecution's star witness was Amber herself. She'd agreed to testify against Gregory in exchange for a reduced sentence. Watching her walk to the stand, I felt rage burn through me. This was the woman who'd smiled at me over sweet potato pie, called me Mama Joyce, destroyed my family from the inside out. Ms. Westbrook, the prosecutor began. How did you meet Gregory Westbrook? Through Floyd Bennett. Floyd recruited me. He had a list of targets, military widows with adult sons and money. He'd provide the financial information, and I'd handle the relationship side. Make the son fall for me, drug him into compliance, access the family home, and steal the documents Floyd specified. And you did this to how many families? 23 over 3 years. Sometimes it was me, sometimes other women Floyd recruited. We had a system. It worked. Until Colonel Vernon Dupree. Amber's face tightened. The colonel was different, smarter, careful. He installed those cameras without anyone knowing. He left fake documents for us to steal, documents that triggered alerts when we tried to use them. He knew we were coming, and he documented everything. By the time we realized he'd outsmarted us, it was too late. Did Gregory Westbrook order Colonel Dupree's murder? Yes. When Gregory realized the colonel had evidence that could bring down the entire operation, he decided the colonel had to die. He used a slow-acting poison, made it look like natural causes. We thought we'd gotten away with it. The courtroom erupted. Judge Patricia Holmes slammed her gavel, calling for order. I sat in the gallery, Henri's hand gripping mine as Amber described my husband's murder in clinical detail. The method, the timeline, the cover-up. Floyd Bennett's attorney tried to argue his client had only provided information, hadn't known about the violence. But the prosecution showed emails, recordings, evidence that Floyd had known everything and had been paid handsomely for his role. He'd received $2 million over 4 years, money laundered through his consulting business. Gregory's attorney claimed his client had been entrapped, that Vernon's surveillance was illegal, that the FBI had manipulated evidence. But Vernon's cameras were legal, installed on his own property, and the footage was time-stamped and authenticated. There was no wiggle room. On the 8th day of trial, the jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Gregory Westbrook, guilty on all counts, including murder, conspiracy, espionage, and racketeering. Floyd Bennett, guilty on all counts of conspiracy and fraud. Amber Westbrook and the other associates who'd testified received reduced sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years. Judge Holmes scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. In that courtroom, packed with families and supporters, she looked down at Gregory Westbrook with cold fury. "Mr. Westbrook, you targeted the families of men and women who served this country with honor. You exploited their grief. You drugged their children. You stole their memories and their dignity. You murdered a decorated veteran who dedicated his life to protecting others. This court finds you to be a danger to society and beyond rehabilitation." She sentenced Gregory to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder charge, with additional consecutive sentences totaling 247 years for the other crimes. Floyd Bennett received 60 years. Neither man would ever be free again. As they led Gregory out of the courtroom, he looked at me one last time. I stared back, unblinking. Vernon had won. Justice had won. And 23 families could begin to heal. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Reverend Washington stepped forward, me and Sister Yvonne flanking her. Today, justice was served. But our work isn't done. We're announcing the creation of the Vernon Dupree Foundation for Military Family Protection. This foundation will provide education about financial exploitation, support services for victims, and advocacy for stronger protections for veterans' families. The foundation launched 3 months later. We'd raised $500,000 from donations, including a substantial contribution from the military credit union that had employed Floyd Bennett, which was trying to repair its reputation. Terrell became our director of outreach, using his experience to help other drugging victims recover. Sister Yvonne ran the support groups. I served as president, working with lawmakers to create better safeguards. Vernon's legacy wasn't just the evidence he'd left behind. It was the community of protection we'd built from the ashes of his death. 23 families became 200 families, became 1,000 families. People protecting each other, watching out for the vulnerable, refusing to let grief make them targets. Terrell moved into his own apartment after 18 months, ready to rebuild his independence. He'd met someone, a kind woman named Zara, who worked as a counselor and understood trauma. They took things slowly, but I could see my son healing, becoming whole again. On the 2-year anniversary of Vernon's death, I stood in his workshop, now converted into the foundation's headquarters. His desk was still there, his radio collection, his filing cabinets full of evidence that had changed so many lives. The surveillance monitors showed our property, the cameras still running, still protecting. I touched Vernon's favorite radio, a 1967 model he'd spent years restoring. "We did it, baby," I said softly. "We finished what you started. And we're making sure it never happens to anyone else." My phone buzzed. A text from Agent Carmichael Hayes. "Mrs. Dupree, wanted you to know. We just arrested 3 more people connected to the Westbrook ring. Your husband's evidence is still paying dividends. He saved more families than he ever knew." I smiled, feeling something that had been tight in my chest for 2 years finally loosen. Vernon was gone, but his love, his protection, his dedication to justice lived on. in the foundation. In the families we'd helped, in the laws we'd changed, in Terrell's recovery, in every person who'd heard our story and learned to protect themselves. Gregory Westbrook had tried to destroy us. Instead, he'd forged us into something stronger. 23 broken families had become a movement. One dead veteran's evidence had become a legacy of protection, and one elderly woman's grief had become unstoppable determination. I locked up the workshop and walked to my car. Tomorrow, I'd speak at Fort Liberty about financial safety. Next week, we'd launch our new counseling program for family members of fraud victims. Next month, Terrell would testify before Congress about the need for stronger protections. But tonight, I'd go home to the house Vernon and I had built together, sit in his favorite chair, and thank him for trusting me with his final mission. He'd known I was strong enough to finish it, and I had. That's all for today's story. If this touched your heart, please subscribe and share your own experiences below. We're all in this together.